You know that moment when you check your bank account and realize you've been making decent money for years, but somehow still have less than $5,000 saved, and you can't even explain where it all went. You know that moment when you check your bank account and realize you've been making decent money for years, but somehow still have less than $5,000 saved, and you can't even explain where it all went. You're not irresponsible. You don't blow money on stupid stuff. You work hard. You pay your bills, but that number just sits there stuck like it's mocking you. And the worst part, you see people around you, same job, same income, maybe even less, and somehow they're talking about investments, taking vacations, buying houses. Meanwhile, you're one car repair away from absolute panic. Here's what nobody tells you. Getting to $25,000 in savings isn't about making more money. It's not about cutting out lattes or meal prepping like some financial masochist. It's about crossing invisible psychological thresholds that completely rewire how money works in your life. And most people never cross them because they're focused on all the wrong things. The financial advice industrial complex wants you obsessed with investment returns and passive income and building wealth. But here's the thing, you can't build wealth when you're standing on quicksand. That first $25,000, that's your foundation. That's what transforms you from someone who experiences money as constant anxiety into someone who experiences it as possibility. And the psychology of getting there is completely different from what happens after. My name is Sten, and I spend way too much time obsessing over why smart, hardworking people stay broke while others with the same resources build real financial security. If you want to understand the actual mechanics behind crossing that $25,000 threshold, not the generic, spend less than you earn garbage, but the specific psychological traps and invisible barriers that keep people stuck, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it ends up helping you see money differently. Look, here's why this matters right now. Research from the Federal Reserve shows that 40% of Americans couldn't cover a $400 emergency without borrowing money or selling something. 40%. We're not talking about building wealth. We're not talking about retiring early. We're talking about having enough money that a flat tire doesn't trigger a financial crisis. And the gap between people who have that cushion and people who don't, it's not income. I've seen people making $150,000 a year living paycheck to paycheck, and people making $45,000 who have built real savings. The difference is understanding three specific thresholds that change everything. The first threshold is $1,000, that's basic survival mode. The second is $5,000, that's where you stop making desperate decisions. And the third is $25,000, that's where the entire game changes because you're no longer playing defense. You're finally playing offense. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why you're stuck below these thresholds and the specific mental shifts required to break through them. We're talking about saving potentially $50,000 to $100,000 over the next decade, just by understanding what's actually blocking you. Let me start with something that sounds completely reasonable and responsible, but is actually keeping millions of people trapped below $5,000 forever. You're aggressively paying off low-interest debt instead of building your savings first. I know, Dave Ramsey is screaming somewhere, but listen to the actual psychology here. You've got $8,000 sitting in your savings account. You've also got a car loan at 4% interest with $7,000 left on it. Every financial fiber in your being says pay off that debt. So you do it. You write that check, you feel that rush of being debt-free, and then 3 weeks later your transmission fails and you need $2,800 for repairs. Now you're right back in debt. Except this time it's on a credit card at 24% interest because you have no savings buffer. You took low-interest, structured debt and converted it into high-interest, chaotic debt. Congratulations, you played yourself. Here's what's really happening. You're treating all debt like it's the same, but it's not. A 4% car loan is not the same as a 24% credit card. The math is completely different. If you have $8,000 in savings and a $7,000 car loan at 4%, that loan is costing you $280 per year in interest. You know what having zero savings costs you? Everything. It costs you the $2,800 repair that goes on a credit card. It costs you the $600 late fee when you can't make rent because an unexpected bill hit. It costs you the $1,200 you pay in overdraft fees over the course of a year because you're constantly cutting it close. Let's do the actual math. That $7,000 car loan at 4% interest costs you $280 annually. But research from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau shows that people with less than $2,000 in savings pay an average of $1,800 per year in fees, overdrafts, and high-interest debt from emergencies. You're paying $280 to save $1,800. That's a 542% return on investment. Show me an index fund that does that. But here's the psychological trap. Paying off debt feels productive. It feels like progress. You see that balance hit zero and your brain releases dopamine. Watching your savings account slowly grow from $1,000 to $2,000 to $3,000, that feels boring. That feels like you're not doing anything. So people choose the dopamine hit over the financial stability. The irony is brutal. You're staying broke because you're being responsible. You're following advice that made sense in a different context. Yeah, if you have $50,000 in savings, pay off that car loan, but you're applying it when you're one emergency away from financial disaster. The smarter move, keep that cushion. Make your minimum payments. Build up to $5,000 or $10,000 in savings first. Then and only then, consider aggressively paying down low-interest debt. Moving on to something that destroys more financial momentum than almost anything else I've seen. You're making financial decisions based on what you should be able to afford rather than what your actual cash flow supports. This one is insidious because it doesn't feel like a mistake when you're making it. It feels like you're being an adult. You get a raise from $50,000 to $60,000 and you think, okay, I can finally afford a nicer apartment or I can finally get a reliable car instead of this beater. The math works on paper. You run the numbers. The rent is 30% of your gross income, which is what financial advisors say is acceptable. So you sign the lease. Here's what actually happens. Your take-home pay goes from $3,200 a month to $3,800 a month, a $600 increase. But that nicer apartment, it's $400 more per month, so you've got $200 left. Except the nicer apartment is in a nicer area, so parking is $150 instead of free. And the utilities aren't included, so that's another $100. And you need furniture that doesn't look ridiculous in this place, so you finance some stuff on a zero-interest credit card, which is another $75 a month. You just turned a $600 raise into a $125 monthly payment increase. Your lifestyle expanded by $725 while your income expanded by $600. You're literally going backwards, but it doesn't feel that way because you're living in a nicer place and driving a nicer car. You should be able to afford this. The math works. But your bank account is telling you a different story. The psychological trap is lifestyle calibration. You believe that your lifestyle should match your income level. You see people making $60,000 living a certain way, and you unconsciously adjust your spending to match that image. It's not about keeping up with the Joneses. It's about keeping up with the invisible standard of what a $60,000 lifestyle looks like. Let's break down the actual numbers. If you had kept your expenses exactly where they were and saved that entire $600 monthly raise, that's $7,200 per year. Over 5 years, even with zero interest, that's $36,000. At a conservative 5% return, that's $42,400. But instead, you increased your expenses by $125 per month, which over 5 years costs you $7,500. And you missed out on saving $36,000. So the total opportunity cost is $43,500 plus the lost investment growth of $6,400. So we're talking about a $49,900 swing over 5 years from one decision that felt completely reasonable. The better alternative, Live like you make $55,000 when you make $60,000, not forever, but long enough to build that foundation. Save that raise for 2 years and you've got $14,400 in the bank. Now you've crossed the $10,000 threshold. Now you have options. Now you can upgrade your life from a position of strength rather than stretching yourself thin. Here's where things get really interesting, and this is the shift that most people never understand. You're stuck in what I call emergency mode thinking, and it's costing you thousands of dollars every single year in ways you don't even realize. Emergency mode thinking is when every financial decision is made from a position of desperation or anxiety. You don't plan purchases, you react to needs. Your car needs new tires, so you buy tires. Your work requires business casual clothes, so you buy some pants. Your phone breaks, so you get a new phone. None of these feel like bad decisions because they're all needs, right? You need tires, you need pants, you need a phone. But here's what's really happening. You're paying the crisis premium on everything. You need tires today, so you go to the first place that can fit you in and pay $600 for a set that you could have gotten for $450 if you'd had time to shop around. You need pants for work tomorrow, so you go to the mall and pay $180 for 3 pairs that you could have gotten for $90 online if you'd had 2 weeks to wait for shipping. Your phone breaks and you need it for work, so you finance a new one for $40 a month instead of buying a refurbished model for $300 outright. Research from the J.P. Morgan Chase Institute shows that households with less than $2,000 in savings pay 15–25% more for the same goods and services compared to households with more than $10,000 in savings. Not because they're making worse choices, because they don't have the luxury of time and planning. Let me give you a concrete example. You're down to your last $100 before payday and you need groceries. You can't do the big shopping trip and meal prep for the week because you don't have enough cash. So you buy just enough for 2 days, then you buy more for the next 2 days. By the time payday hits, you've spent $140 on food that would have cost you $80 if you'd been able to buy in bulk and plan meals. That's $60 extra or 75% more, just because you were in emergency mode. Over the course of a year, this happens with groceries, household items, car maintenance, clothes, everything. That 15–25% premium on a $35,000 annual spending budget is $5,250 to $8,750 per year. You're working an extra month and a half every year just to pay the premium for being broke. The psychological trap is that each individual decision feels necessary and reasonable. You're not being irresponsible. You're responding to genuine needs. But you're trapped in a pattern where you're always reacting, never planning, and that reactive stance costs you massive amounts of money. It's like paying a subscription fee to stay broke. Here's what compounds this problem. Emergency mode thinking prevents you from ever building the savings that would get you out of emergency mode. You can't save money this month because you had 3 emergencies. But next month you'll have 3 different emergencies because you're living without a buffer. It becomes self-perpetuating. The shift happens when you hit around $5,000 in savings. Suddenly you can wait for the sale. You can shop around. You can buy the $300 refurbished phone instead of financing the $1,200 new one. You can stock up when prices are good instead of buying whatever you need right now at whatever price it costs. That $5,000 buffer doesn't just sit there. It actively makes you money by eliminating the crisis premium on everything you buy. But here's where things get really crazy, and this is the part that changes everything once you understand it. The real threshold that transforms everything isn't actually about the money sitting in your account. It's about the mental shift from "what can I afford right now" to "what serves my future self." And this is where we get into why $25,000 is the magic number. It's not arbitrary. Here's what happens psychologically when you cross different savings thresholds that completely changes your relationship with money. At $1,000, you're still in survival mode. Every decision is about immediate needs. You have exactly 1 month of breathing room if something goes wrong, which means you have zero breathing room because something always goes wrong. At $5,000, you exit permanent crisis mode. You can handle a car repair without your entire life imploding. You can wait for sales. You can make decisions based on value instead of urgency. This is where you stop paying the broke premium on everything. At $10,000, you start experiencing something completely new, optionality. You can consider switching jobs because you have runway. You can negotiate from a position of strength. You can walk away from bad situations because you're not financially desperate. This is the first time money starts creating freedom instead of just preventing disaster. But at $25,000, that's where everything fundamentally changes. Here's why. $25,000 is approximately 6-8 months of expenses for most people. That's the threshold where your brain stops processing money as a scarce resource you're constantly defending and starts processing it as a tool you're strategically deploying. It's the difference between playing defense and playing offense. Research from Vanguard shows that investors with less than $10,000 in liquid savings make emotional financial decisions 73% more often than those with more than $25,000. We're talking about panic selling investments during market dips, taking on high-interest debt for opportunities, or making fear-based career decisions. That $25,000 threshold is the difference between reactive and strategic. Think about it this way. If you have $2,000 in savings and the market crashes 30%, you're terrified because you're thinking, I can't afford any losses. If you have $25,000 in savings and the market crashes 30%, you're thinking, I should probably buy more while it's on sale. Same event, completely different response. That's what the threshold does to your psychology. Let me be clear. I'm not saying you need $25,000 before you start investing or making any wealth-building moves. I'm saying that $25,000 is the point where you cross from constantly putting out fires to actually building something. And here's the thing that nobody talks about. Getting from $0 to $25,000 requires completely different strategies than getting from $25,000 to $100,000, which requires different strategies than getting from $100,000 to $500,000. Most financial advice is written for people who already have the foundation. They're talking about optimizing investment returns and tax strategies when you're still trying to figure out how to not overdraft your checking account. It's like giving someone advice on how to run a marathon faster when they're still learning to walk. So let's talk about the actual strategies that work when you're building from $0 to $25,000. And I'm warning you now, some of this is going to contradict everything you've been told. Stop diversifying your income sources until you've maximized your primary income. This is going to make the side hustle crowd angry, but hear me out. You're working a full-time job making $50,000 a year. You see all these people talking about side hustles and passive income and diversification. So you start driving for Uber on weekends, you buy some equipment to start a small business, you create an Etsy store, whatever. You're hustling. Here's what actually happens. You spend 15 hours a week on side projects that generate $400 a month, which is $4,800 a year. That's $320 per hour, which sounds decent. Except you also spent $1,200 on equipment and supplies, so it's really $3,600, which is $240 per hour, which is still okay. But here's what you're not calculating: the opportunity cost. What if you'd spent those 15 hours per week, that's 780 hours per year, getting better at your primary job, learning the skills that lead to promotions, building the relationships that open doors, positioning yourself for a raise? A 10% raise on $50,000 is $5,000 per year, every year, without having to work nights and weekends, without startup costs, without the mental overhead of managing multiple income streams. The psychological trap is diversification feels smart and safe. If one income source disappears, you have others. But when you're building from zero, diversification is actually a distraction. You're spreading yourself thin across multiple mediocre income sources instead of going deep on one excellent income source. I've seen this pattern hundreds of times. Someone is making $45,000 at their job, but they're not really invested in it because they're thinking of it as just one income stream. They're saving all their creativity and energy for their side hustles. Then 5 years later, they're still making $48,000 at their job. Their side hustles collectively generate $6,000 a year, and they're exhausted. Meanwhile, their colleague who focused entirely on becoming exceptional at their primary role is now making $75,000 with less stress and more savings. The better strategy: go all in on maximizing your primary income until you're making at least $70,000 Then, once you have that foundation and you've built real savings, diversify if you want, but not before. You can't build wealth on side hustle income when your main income is still struggling. Here's another one that's going to sound completely backwards, but the math is undeniable. Stop trying to save money on things that cost you time and energy. You spend 3 hours on Sunday meal prepping to save $40 on food for the week. You spend 45 minutes driving across town to save $15 on groceries. You fix your own car to save $200 on labor even though it takes you all weekend and you're not sure you did it right. This is poverty thinking disguised as frugality, and I'm not judging, I get it. When you don't have money, time is all you have to spend. But here's the problem: you're trading your most valuable resource, your time and cognitive energy, for small amounts of money. And in doing so, you're preventing yourself from building the capacity to earn significantly more money. Let's do the math on meal prepping. 3 hours on Sunday to save $40 per week. That's $13.33 per hour saved. If you're making $50,000 a year, your time is worth approximately $24 per hour. You're doing work that pays $13.33 per hour when you could be doing work that pays $24 per hour, or investing that time in skills that could make you worth $35 per hour. But it's worse than that. Those 3 hours of meal prep don't just cost you 3 hours. They cost you the mental energy, the Sunday afternoon you could have spent resting or learning or building something, and the compound effect of being exhausted Monday morning instead of recharged. Now, I'm not saying become irresponsible and order DoorDash every night. I'm saying be strategic about where you deploy your time and energy. If you're trying to get from $50,000 to $70,000 in income, you need to be obsessed with that goal. You need to be learning, networking, positioning yourself. You don't have time to spend 3 hours meal prepping to save $40. The shift happens when you start thinking in terms of energy budgets instead of just money budgets. You have a limited amount of energy each day. You can spend it on optimizing groceries and doing your own car maintenance, or you can spend it on building skills and relationships that 10x your income. You cannot do both. Choose. Here's where this gets really interesting. The people who successfully cross the $25,000 threshold aren't the ones who are most frugal. They're the ones who are most strategic about where they focus their energy. Let's talk about something that sounds disciplined but is actually self-sabotage. You're setting financial goals based on what you think you should save instead of what actually works for your psychology. You read that you should save 20% of your income. You make $50,000, so you set up automatic transfers of $833 per month to your savings account. Month 1, you do it. Month 2, something comes up and you dip into savings. Month 3, you're frustrated that your savings aren't growing, so you stop the automatic transfer altogether. Now you're saving nothing and you feel like a failure. Here's what's really happening. You set a goal that was mathematically correct but psychologically impossible. And when you inevitably failed to meet it, you concluded that you're bad with money. But you're not bad with money. You just set yourself up to fail by ignoring your actual behavior patterns. Research from behavioral economists at MIT shows that people are more likely to stick with a savings plan when they start with amounts that feel achievable and gradually increase them. Starting with saving 5% and increasing by 1% every few months leads to better outcomes than starting with 20% and failing. Let's break this down. If you save $200 per month consistently for 24 months, that's $4,800. If you commit to saving $833 per month but only do it for 4 months before giving up, that's $3,332. The ambitious plan that you couldn't maintain generated less savings than the modest plan that you actually followed. But it's not just about the money, it's about the identity shift. When you successfully save $200 every month for 2 years, you become a person who saves money. That's your new identity. When you fail to save $833 per month, you become a person who can't stick to financial goals. Identity matters more than the dollar amounts. The better approach, start uncomfortably small, like so small it feels stupid. If you've never successfully saved money, start with $50 per month. Not because $50 is going to change your life, but because you need to prove to yourself that you can do it. Do that for 3 months. Then increase to $100. Do that for 3 months. Then $150. You're building the habit and the identity before you're building the wealth. Here's the part nobody wants to hear. Most people never reach $25,000 because they're trying to sprint a marathon. They get motivated, make dramatic changes, burn out, and reset to zero. You know what works? Boring consistency over multiple years. It's not exciting. It doesn't make good social media content, but it's what actually builds the foundation. Let me give you the final piece that ties all of this together. The real reason most people never reach $25,000 is that they think the obstacle is external when it's actually internal. They think the problem is that they don't make enough money, or that rent is too high, or that unexpected expenses keep happening. And sure, those things are real, but they're not the reason you're stuck. The reason you're stuck is that you haven't made the psychological shift from seeing savings as what's left over to seeing savings as the foundation of everything else. Here's the shift. Most people budget like this. Income minus expenses equals savings. So they earn $4,000, spend $3,800, and save $200. Then next month an expense comes up and they spend $4,100 and they save nothing. People who successfully build savings budget like this. Income minus savings equals spending budget. They earn $4,000, save $500, and figure out how to live on $3,500. It's the same math, but the psychology is completely different. In the first scenario, savings is a hope. In the second scenario, savings is a commitment. This is what it means to pay yourself first. Not as a cute phrase, but as an actual practice discipline. The money goes to savings before it can be spent on anything else. And yes, this means some months you have to make uncomfortable choices about what you can't afford. That's the point. You're choosing short-term discomfort for long-term security. Look, here's the truth that nobody wants to say. Getting to $25,000 in savings when you're starting from zero is going to take most people 3-5 years of sustained, boring, consistent effort. It's not sexy. It's not going to make you feel like a financial guru. There are no hacks. It's just consistent behavior over time, compounding slowly, until one day you check your account and realize you're not anxious anymore. But here's what happens when you cross that threshold. Everything changes. You start getting opportunities that weren't available before. You can take the job that pays less now but has better long-term prospects because you have runway. You can negotiate harder because you're not desperate. You can invest in yourself, education, certifications, equipment, because you have a cushion. The $25,000 doesn't just sit there. It becomes a launch pad. Your future self is counting on the decision you make right now. You can keep doing what you've been doing, reacting to emergencies, staying in crisis mode, making decisions based on fear. And 5 years from now, you'll be in the same position, wondering where the time went. Or you can make the shift today. Stop chasing side hustles until you've maximized your main income. Stop penny pinching on things that drain your energy. Stop setting goals based on what you should do and start with what you'll actually do. Build the foundation first. Most people never reach $25,000 because they're trying to build wealth before they've built stability. Stop trying to build wealth. Build stability first. The wealth comes later. Trust me, your future self will thank you for it.